Alrighty then, should we get started? Thank you for joining me once again. It's Tony Gates here from the Parenting Research Centre. I'm your host for this series of sessions. There's 7 in all. We're talking through an approach to managing tantrums. It's called functional assessment. And we've had 4 sessions already in this course. Some of you might be new to these sessions. So if you're not aware, this is the 5th session in a course. And what we're going through is an evidence-based, really effective way of managing all sorts of difficult behavior actually, and we're applying it to the case of tantrums and hopefully helping you to manage what's going on in your family. Tonight's session is all about building skills, as you can see on the screen there. It's also the first session in our kind of 3rd level of this course, which means that we're kind of moving into a troubleshooting sort of mode. We're still giving you new ideas each week, but there's more opportunities, hopefully, if I manage the time right, for you to give me feedback or comments on how you're going and to perhaps ask questions of me, or I can give you tips or help you resolve anything that's not clear enough. So I'm hoping that we will have some good chats and interaction and stuff going on tonight. Don't feel like you need to be quiet in the chat box while we're going through stuff. Feel free to talk to each other. Feel free to share your ideas about how you're going. And feel free to ask questions, of course, as we're going through. How is everybody anyway? Have you been having a good day? I know, Rachel, it sounds like you've been struggling around bedtime. It's probably quite relatable for many of us attending tonight. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to try and keep this moving because I'm aware that sometimes I talk a bit slowly. First, a couple of acknowledgements that I do each week. First is the Department of Education and Training here in Victoria, who has generously funded this project, which is why it's free to not only Victorians, but people all around Australia and the world, thanks to the wonderful magic of the internet. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting tonight, here in Melbourne, where I am, and Kim, our facilitator, also is. That is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, so I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people we may have joining us tonight. As always, I like to point out that this is general information only and really encourage you to seek extra support. There's no shame in that. If you have a lot of difficult behavior or tantrums are really causing a big problem for you, you really should seek extra support. It can have a huge impact on you and your family. So please don't hesitate to seek extra support. Don't feel like if this isn't helping that you're out of options. There are other things you can do. Now, this is a course. Let's recap where we're up to. We started out with the first session, which was an overview of the whole thing. Then we've now completed the 2nd level as well, which was all of the content. We covered all the strategies, well, the main strategies required for functional assessment to start working. And then in level 3, we're going to build on that with some more strategies which are going to help you succeed in the long term, and ideas that are going to help you kind of make these changes stick, which is a big challenge. Don't underestimate it. There's a lot for you to do. There's a lot for your child to adjust to, and over time, it's going to help. So here's what we've completed. Those 4. If you haven't seen all of those, we're not going to have time to cover all of that tonight. There's 4 hours worth of content. I suggest you go back and watch the recordings. Make sure you're starting to put this into practice, that you're doing some of the activities each week, because we are building on it each time, and there's quite a lot in there. On that note, let's have a look at where we're up to. I'm going to take my video off the screen, so you won't see me, but you should still hear me if everything goes to plan. This is kind of a model of what we've looked at so far, a bit of a summary. This is the behavior chain. You can see I've got that labeled down the bottom. That's just what goes on every day. A child's doing a behavior, they get a response. They do a behavior, they get a response. They do a behavior, they get a response. That's just their experience of the world and the kind of environment around them. then at some point, perhaps around here, we get something that we're not so thrilled about, a tantrum. And so the question is, what do we do about that? And in this diagram, we've got some things pointed out that we've already covered. A key one is down here, the replacement behavior. That's super important. And the positive consequence for the replacement behavior. Last week, we also talked about negative consequences for the tantrum or the difficult behavior. And we've also talked about this guy here, trying to intervene earlier in the behavior chain to stop the tantrum from happening in the first place. So if you can anticipate, we're heading into the danger zone here, that's very powerful because you then have an opportunity to avoid it or make it less likely that that tantrum is going to happen. So remember, you can never completely stop any risk of tantrums. We don't really have that power as parents. All you can hope to do is reduce the likelihood of them happening and reduce the number of tantrums that you get over time or their severity. So last week we really focused on this bit, what happens after a tantrum, how to respond. This week we're going to be trying to, well, I'll tell you that in a second after we do this poll. How about that? So just to get you guys participating, I thought it would be interesting to hear what you've been doing so far. So this is going to come up on your screen as a multiple choice questionnaire where you can tick that's if you're on a PC. Who knows how well that'll work if you're on a mobile device. Just bear with me if you are. I'm interested in what you started using at home. And there are 6 particulars I've picked out there that you might have thought about or started using. A key one in functional assessment is thought about the purpose. I hope lots of you have had a go at that. And even if you've not succeeded and you're not sure exactly what it is, I hope you've got an idea at least. Identified a replacement behavior. That's a really important one, something that you want to happen instead of a tantrum. Done something around planned responses. That's what we covered last time around negative consequences, maybe trying time out or thinking about it. Tracking behavior, that's one that often gets overlooked so that you know where the tantrums are going up or down over time. Catching your child being good is super important. That's where you're really pushing yourself to pick up on anytime your child is doing something that's more desirable so that you can really enhance that. And if you've thought about trying to change something earlier in the behavior chain so you can recognize that, oh, we're heading towards something that might cause a tantrum here. Let's see if we can divert onto something more productive. All right, we've got heaps of responses there. I might stop that poll in 3, 2, 1. All right, that'll do. You might be able to see those responses on the screen. We've got heaps of you are doing a great job catching a child being good. Lots have identified a replacement behavior. Probably our weakest area as a group is around tracking behavior. I'd be interested to hear from you guys if that's something to do with I need to explain it better or give you more ideas for how to do that, or if it's just like you feel that it's too hard or doesn't suit your lifestyle and your family. So feel free to share your ideas or comments on that in the chat. But thank you for your responses there. That's where you guys are up to. Let's see what we're going to add to that today. So we're just recapping this with the behavior chain and how we want to intervene. Today we're going to kind of zoom out again and try and understand a bit more about the totality of your child's experience. So remember in earlier sessions we covered this a bit in our psychological theory of why tantrums happen in the first place. That's something we're going to be using tonight. So the reason we look at skills and how they relate to tantrums is because it's important for understanding how your child gets by in the world. So they're trying to interact with the environment around them. That's what the scene here is supposed to represent. And things will either be going well or not so well. They'll either be satisfied or they're starting to get frustrated. And as you'll remember from our theory of why tantrums happen, if frustration is building up, that's going to be a problem because it's going to increase the risk of tantrums happening at some point soon. So that's our rationale for why we're going into skills, and they can be a really powerful way of reducing the amount of tantrums that you get. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Let me know if you're not clear on that. Here's what we're going to cover. First of all, I'm going to give you some tips on how and why we should try and identify strengths that your child already has. Then we're going to think about what are the priority areas that you should target for your child and your family. What skills are going to be the best ones to start with. Then we're going to go through some examples. So these are just some ideas from me that I think are generally pretty good ideas for most kids and most families. And you'll have an opportunity to think, well, does that apply to me? Or how well does that apply? I'm going to take you through how to teach the new skill that you're hoping your child will pick up and will help divert or reduce the number of tantrums. The particular way we do that. And finally, we're going to talk about scaffolding their learning. That's related to teaching the skill, but it's about how we progress over time and making sure that what we're doing is realistic and achievable, and what to do if it's not going so well. Hope that suits you all, and of course we'll have time for questions at the end. Like I said, I think we'll have a bit more time than usual. That's my aim. So I'm going to keep going and try not to get bogged down too much. So we'll start off with how we identify strengths, or the reason we try and identify strengths that already exist in your child. So remember, this is a recap. We covered this in session number, I think, 3, or it might have been 2. This is our theory of why tantrums happen. Remember, the picture on the left represents the world, the environment that your child lives in, that they experience. And on the right, we've got some particulars about your child, their temperament, their genes, the way they're made up. And you can't do too much about that, right? These two things are then going to come together, and it's either going to go really nice and smoothly and everyone's happy, or sometimes it doesn't, and there's the potential there for your child to get frustrated. And if that happens too much, particularly for young children or children with developmental delays or disabilities or additional needs, there's the potential to get overwhelmed, and lo and behold, you have a tantrum, right? That should, like I was saying earlier, that should indicate to you why it's important to reduce your child's frustration. And that's where skills come in. If your child has more skills to cope with the world around them or to get what they want out of it, there's less likelihood that they'll get frustrated. Now, just to make a point here, every child has strengths of some sort. Even if you feel like your child struggles with heaps of things, we really mean relative strengths, okay? So compared to the other areas in which they're trying to do things or in which they're trying to cope or deal with the world, what are their relative strengths? And strengths can be found in any situation. So even if your child's having a tantrum, there might be strengths going on that they're using. Now, I don't mean necessarily that having the tantrum is a great thing, but you might be able to identify things around them that they are doing better compared to other things that they do. So I want you to think, kind of put your microscope over your child's strengths, because sometimes we have to think quite creatively about it. Particularly if you're frustrated with your child, you're not likely to be thinking, gee, they've got some good strengths. So we don't want to focus too much on the tantrum itself. So this is one of those areas where, again, we need to expand our attention not just to the tantrum, but to your child's everyday life, and think about, all right, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how do they contribute when it does get to tantrum time? So you need to think about your child in a range of situations, all right? What are the benefits of identifying and focusing on strengths? Well, they're pretty clear, and there are some really good good reasons for doing that. The first is it does help to reduce difficult behavior, like we've talked about. It can reduce that frustration. Second of all, it can improve self-esteem. Now, it's not one that you necessarily would instinctively relate to tantrums, but it's actually quite important. A child who has higher self-esteem is less likely to respond in kind of these self-defeating, unproductive ways. They're more likely to be proactive and try and manage the situation in a more appropriate way, or to feel like they can do the replacement behavior that you're trying to get them to do. And finally, the other benefit is it can improve their social value. Now, what I mean by that is it can make them kind of easier or more pleasant for other people to get along with. So other people will like them more, which is a really good outcome on its own. So if your child has more skills, they're more likely to be helpful to people, they're more likely to be appreciated, they're more likely to feel good about themselves, and then less likely to get frustrated by the whole situation. So that's what we wanted to say about identifying strengths. And again, that really does depend on you kind of doing some work behind the scenes here and thinking about your child and your particular situation. Hit me up with some questions in the chat or at the question time at the end if you really can't think of any for your child. Next, we're going to move on to identifying priority areas. And there's a particular rubric that we're going to use for this. So what we're going to do is go through a way of working out what sort of skills you should be aiming to build in your child. So there are some criteria that we're going to look for. The first one, it's great if you can choose a skill that builds on your child's strengths, like we just talked about. That's a good place to start for those reasons that we discussed: building self-esteem, social value, helping with difficult behavior. All right, first criterion. Second one, it's great if you focus on a skill that is used in daily activities. So what I mean here is think about your child's routine. What do they need to get through every day? They have to get up in the morning, they have to get dressed, they have to brush their teeth, they have to let you brush their teeth, they have to wait maybe while you're doing something, they have to eat, they have to go places. All these routines that they kind of need to participate in, that's a great one to focus on. That's a skill that would help them with that. Skills that are used often are also a great idea. So if they can use them every day, guess what? They're going to be practicing more, they're going to be improving more. It's going to both increase the rate at which they acquire those new skills and increase the benefits of acquiring those skills. So if you're thinking of a skill like that they can only use every so often, like interacting nicely with a particular friend, but they only see that friend once every couple of weeks, it's pretty hard for them to build up that skill. It's okay, it's still one worth using, but if you can think of something that they can do every day or reasonably often, that's a benefit. Next, try and choose skills, if you can, that will help your child be viewed positively by others. So a classic one here is social skills, being kind of nice to play with, not snatching, not hitting, sharing nicely. Also things like manners, particularly other relatives might get caught up on manners. That can help your child a lot as well as helping you, and also help to reduce their frustration. Next, one that is, it sounds obvious when you hear it, but sometimes we overlook. Try and choose a skill that they want to learn. So if they're motivated and you have an idea that, yeah, this is something that they'd be into or they'd be on board with or they'd be motivated about, that's going to really help with the learning process. And the final and sixth criterion is skills that build independence. In other words, if it helps them do something for themselves, that's a really good idea. Again, for self-esteem, for them generally feeling like they are in control of their environment, that they can do what they need to do, that's going to reduce their frustration, reduce the likelihood of tantrums. All right? That's our 6 sort of priority areas. Now, when you're thinking about skills, I'll just bring myself back on the screen because I haven't been on there for a while. When you're thinking about skills, you're not going to find ones that are going to meet all these criteria, I don't think. I think you'll be doing pretty well if you do. These are just areas that I want you to think about and try and tick off as many of those boxes as you can. So don't push yourself to think of ones that, no, I can't do that, it doesn't tick one of those boxes. This is just to guide your thinking. The more ticks, the better, but don't feel like you need to get all of them. What we're going to do now is revisit the telephone test. Remember our old friend, the telephone test? Well, it's an important principle, and we keep bringing it back in various parts of this course because it forces us to be specific and focused in what we're trying to do. We're going to use it in this case when we're talking about skills. I want you to describe your skill in such a way that it would pass the telephone test. So you wouldn't say something like, the skill I'm targeting is being better at writing, or the skill I'm targeting is being nicer, or the skill I'm targeting is cooperating, or the skill I'm targeting is, I can't think of another one off the top of my head. Those are too vague. We've got to be specific, and we've got to make sure that we spell out exactly what that's going to look like, so that we, first of all, know how to focus our efforts, and secondly, so that we know if we're succeeding or not. And a few things that you might want to look for in using the telephone test. Try and include something about the standard that you're aiming for. So if you're trying to teach your child a new skill around sharing toys when they're playing with other kids, you want to think about, all right, how accurate do they need to be? Like, how specific are we thinking that sharing has to be? Like, are we saying if they kind of push a toy towards the kid's general direction, is that pass? Is that them actually doing the skill? Or do they actually have to go up to someone and say, hi, you can share this? Or just kind of offer it to them and put it in their lap? So think about exactly how accurately they have to do it. Secondly, think about the quality that you're aiming for, so how well they do it. If you're thinking about something like fetching a drink of water, do you expect them to do it without spilling any? Or do you expect them to do it quick? Well, do you expect them to do it first try? Or are you aiming for them to do it, you know, with the minimum amount of turns of the tap or something like that, or without wasting too much water? Try and think about what quality level you're expecting. Think about time. So this is how long they do it for. Something like brushing their teeth, you might say, well, to brush their teeth properly, they need to spend, actually, I'm not a dentist, I shouldn't say, but my guess would be maybe they spend 30 seconds on the top and 30 seconds on the bottom. Whatever the rule is that you're going for, you might have a standard that you're aiming for around time. And also think if you can put in a standard around speed, how quickly are they needing to do this to pass your sort of test? If it's getting dressed in the morning, is it okay for them to take half an hour to get dressed? Or do you think, no, they could really do that in 5 minutes, or they could do it in 2 minutes? Whatever suits you. Nikki, you're not familiar with the telephone test? That's no problem. It's pretty simple. It's just the idea that if you were to try and describe this skill to a friend who's listening on the other end of the phone, so if after the session you called them up and said, I've participated in this live webinar, and we talked about identifying skills that we can work on with our children to try and reduce the likelihood of tantrums, and your friend said, oh yeah, what skill did you pick? You'd then describe it in such a way that they know exactly what you mean, and they're saying, oh yeah, I know what you mean, versus saying something like, oh, we're trying to get him to be less naughty, or we're trying to teach him to talk more. Your friend might be saying, okay, I can't quite picture in my head exactly what you mean by that. That's what the telephone test is. Caroline, you have a question about, do you know around what age kids can understand or learn to share? There are we're going to cover this a bit later, right towards the end of the session, about kind of the component skills that go together towards making up a bigger skill. But sharing, I would say, start really early on. Anytime they're interacting with other kids and they're noticing other kids and the other kids are noticing them, you can start building on kind of what we might call pro-social skills. So it would start off with kind of not snatching or not hitting, and then it would move into, later on it would move into things like turn taking, which is a bit more complicated. Before that, you might get into offering toys, and you'd role model that. So there'll be a whole lot of steps, but I would say early on you can start with kind of, you'll sometimes see babies 6 months old, sitting next to each other, kind of looking at each other, and you can demonstrate or try and get them to kind of be interacting with the same toys and doing that in kind of a gentle, respectful way of each other. That's hard to do. You'd mainly just be doing that with role modeling and sort of social engineering rather than explaining it. All right, so once you've done that, you're going to end up with a statement a bit like this, where you're spelling out, just in rough terms, what you're aiming for, which will be, first of all, they're given something like an opportunity to interact with another kid, or a stool to reach the tap, or a prompt to remind them that they need to go to the bathroom, something like that. Then second, what they'll do. So it might be fetch a drink of water, it might be say that they're tired, it might be ask for some food, it might be, tell you something else about what's going on. And then lastly, how well they're going to do it. So with, they're going to do it with no spills, or they're going to do it so that I understand clearly, or they're going to do it before someone loses their temper, or just something there about how well they're going to do it based on kind of like this expected standard stuff that we covered. And then you're kind of set up to know what you're aiming for, and we can start trying to make that happen, which is a pretty good place to be. So we've covered priority areas, and now we're going to try and apply this to some examples. All right. Now, these examples are basically just ideas that I've come up with based on what seems to be useful to lots of parents. It's not particularly scientific. But as we go through, the really important part is that you learn to apply these criteria that we've mentioned so that you can think about how well they apply to your family. Because some of these will really suit you, and some of them won't suit you so much. And you'll be able to tell that based on thinking about your child. So some of them you'll be like, that's not going to work for us. Some of them you'll be like, yeah, I can see that working. So here's some that we'll go through. The first one is entertaining themselves. So look at the picture here. That's a pretty good example. You've got a child playing with some blocks on their own. He looks pretty young, maybe 3 or something like that. And your child entertaining themselves would probably be something like when you tell them to go and play by themselves or to go and play with their blocks, they go and do that quietly for a certain amount of time until you tell them that it's time to do something else. So that would be a way of describing that. Now I'll turn off my video again, and let's see how well this passes our criteria for choosing skills. And I want you to think about it for your family, but in general, does this build on their strengths? Well, that's a bit of a question mark, because it'll depend on what your child's strengths are. If they have pretty good fine motor skills and they like putting stuff together, you might say, yeah, I could see my child building blocks for the sake of playing, entertaining themselves as building on their strengths. So maybe you give that one a tick. Used in daily activities, that's probably going to get a tick, right? For most of us, there'll be times during the day where you need your child to entertain themselves or where that would be helpful. Used often, I think that one would get a tick because like I said, it can come up every day. They can get a chance to practice this pretty often. Will it help your child be viewed positively by others? Well, for some of you, it might not make much difference. People might not care whether they can entertain themselves or not. I'm going to put a question mark on this one. For some of you, it'll make a big difference, particularly, if you've got friends coming around and you want to be able to talk to them in peace for 20 minutes while your child does something to entertain themselves. So that could be really a really useful skill in that sense. One that they want to learn, that's a question mark again, because it'll depend on you and your child, your particular circumstances. So some kids will really be into this. They'll be excited. Oh yeah, some activity, I can do this by myself. Great. Other kids will really want you to play with them and strongly resist the idea of doing things by themselves. Finally, does it build independence? It probably does for most of you, because it means that they don't need you to entertain them as much. They can do some of that for themselves. Let me know any differences for you. Why don't you share that in the chat, because I'm sure other people will be interested to hear. Do you think in your case there's a skill around entertaining themselves that your child will want to learn, or is that going to be a real struggle getting them on board in your family? Let us know in the chat. But another idea would be fetching something for themselves, like food or water. This is a classic one. And it's one of those ones that's really useful, because you won't always, sometimes your child might have a tantrum, and behind the scenes, if you know the purpose, you might be able to tell that it's something to do with, oh, they're actually thirsty and they didn't realize, or they weren't able to communicate it or do anything about it, and they got overwhelmed. So this can be a really useful one for many people. It's just about, they identify, maybe they identify for themselves that they're hungry or thirsty, or you tell them, hey, you need to go get a drink of water because you reckon they are hungry or thirsty by now. Let's have a look at our criteria. Does this build on their strengths? Well, that's going to be sort of a question mark for most of us, I think. For some children, it will, because they're good at interacting with things. They can turn on taps safely, or they are confident enough to go and get something, or they can tell when they're hungry or thirsty. They're old enough to do that. Other kids, not so much. If you've got a child with additional needs, particularly a physical disability, or a neurological issue like cerebral palsy, where it's quite hard for them to interact with things, at least without help, then it might not tick that box. Used in daily activities, I think this one probably gets a tick. All kids are going to be hungry or thirsty at some point throughout the day, which means it's also going to happen often. And also they need to eat and drink every day, so it's bound to come up, right? Is it going to help your child be viewed positively by others? Well, that's going to be a question mark, I reckon. See if you agree with me. For most kids, it's going to depend on what people around them care about. So if people in your family really admire a child who's independent, who can get things for themselves without needing help, then yeah. But if no one really minds, or people really like helping your child get food or drink, then not so much. Next one, is it one that they want to learn? Again, that's just going to depend entirely on your child, so I won't tick that or anything for you. And is it going to build independence? I think that gets a tick, because your child's faced with a situation where they're hungry or thirsty. If you're teaching them the skill of how to meet that need for themselves, then they're more independent. They're less reliant on other people. Might be good for their confidence and self-esteem. Next idea, a classic, good old sharing, asking manners. These kind of what we call pro-social skills. So that means kind of what it looks like here in the picture, maybe sharing a toy, maybe it's taking turns, or it could be something like saying please, thank you. Now, how does this fare against our criteria? Does it build on strengths? Well, that's a big question mark, isn't it? Some kids that will be a strength because they're pretty confident around other kids, or they love interacting with other kids, or they've got good language skills, or they're good at making eye contact, or they aren't particularly territorial about their toys. Other kids, they really shut down around other children, or they really struggle to communicate, or they just get so attached to their toys that it's really hard for them to share them. There we'd say maybe not so great at ticking that box. Used in daily activities, possibly not, depending on if they've got siblings or how often they're interacting with other children. If we're talking about manners, now that could definitely be used in everyday activities, couldn't it? If you're thinking they need to say thank you or something like that, that could be a useful skill. Used often Again, similar to the previous box, it will depend on in your family how often they do those things. It probably gets a tick in that there's lots of opportunities for them children to use those kind of skills. Help child be viewed positively by others. I think that gets a huge tick, a double, triple tick in this case, because that's basically what the skill is all about, interacting with others in a way that they're going to like. Is it one that they're going to want to learn? Ooh, big question mark there. Some kids will not be on board, and it's really going to be like pulling teeth trying to get them to do this. Others will be like, yeah, okay, I'd like to interact with other people in a way that they want me to. Is it going to build independence? Well, that's kind of a question mark. Are you always there when your child's playing with other kids and you can kind of referee and guide things? In which case, maybe it's not such an issue. Or do you sometimes leave your child alone with others, or, you know, leave the siblings alone, and you need them to kind of get along independently? Then it would be a tick. I think this is the final one we're going to cover. Oh no, second last one. Communication. I'm going to move a bit quicker because I don't want to... I feel like we're spending a little bit too long on these examples. Communication. Here's an example using sign language, but of course that just looks good in the picture. It could also be verbal communication. Does it build on strengths? Depends on your child's communication skills. Used in daily activities. That's going to get a tick, definitely. Can be used often. Viewed positively by others? Probably. Maybe people will, depends on if your child has additional needs or not and how understanding people are. Is it something that they will want to learn? I think mostly once they're doing it, children will want to, but there'll be some who certainly resist it. Does it build independence? I would say in all cases. I can't think of anywhere that wouldn't build independence, communication skills. Last idea that you want to oh no, it's not the last idea. Second last idea that you might want to consider, just as an example, counting or reading. You might think, how does that relate to tantrums? Remember, we had some examples around replacement behaviors that involve counting or reading as a general kind of get in the way of the tantrum happening, something to do instead. But it also can increase your child's confidence, reduce their frustration, make them feel like, hey, they're doing good stuff and they're a valuable person. So I won't go through all the criteria for that one. That could be a good activity for you to do yourself. Think through, does that pass the criteria that we're looking for around choosing skills to target? And the last one I was thinking about was motor control. Particularly if your child has challenges around motor control, like let's say it's fine motor control, controlling their fingers. And firstly, are you aware of that? So think about your child's strengths and weaknesses. If your child really struggles with motor control, that's going to be important because, well, how are they going to go getting themselves a drink of water? Maybe they can't handle the tap, or they are likely to spill it. And so they might want to avoid this if it's not a strength of theirs. But it might also be worth building on it for that reason to help them feel more confident in those situations. So again, that's one that you could go through. But basically the idea is to come up with your own and then look at those 6 criteria for skills to focus on and see how well your idea fares. So we've gone through those examples. We'll just have some ideas for how you can teach and scaffold these skills next. I don't have too much to say about teaching skills except to encourage you to do not too much talking, right? The first one we've got there on the left is verbal instruction. It's the least important one, to be frank. So if you're relying on verbal instruction to teach your child, you're missing out, I guess, on lots of opportunities to help them really effectively. These other ones are much more useful. So things like gesturing, that's using hand movements or kind of maybe even taking their hands or kind of prodding them in the right direction. That can be really effective. Demonstration can be really effective. So if you're trying to teach your child to share, you being a good role model, sitting down with them and showing them this is what it looks like when you offer your toy to another child. This is what it looks like when you choose a toy that another child isn't using right now. Finally, physical guiding is kind of what's happening in the picture here, where you take their hands or their arms and physically kind of take them through the motions. That can be particularly useful for kids with additional needs, but also for take them through the motions. That can be particularly useful for kids with additional needs, but also for like young kids if they're trying to do something like fetch themselves some food, or maybe you're trying to teach them to cut their own food at dinner time, or maybe you need, they need some guiding around navigating around your house, particularly if their gross motor skills are not so well developed. So that's just really to prompt you not to rely on verbal instruction and actually get in there, demonstrate, show them, help guide them. Finally, you want to scaffold their learning. Scaffolding just means basically you start at a low level and then build up onto it, rather than expecting them to start out at completion and just a perfect performance of the skill and just working at it till they can do it perfectly. So think of it like stepping stones. We can break any skill down into component parts, right? Even ones that may not seem that they have component parts, where the idea here is I'm going to try and sort of coach you on how you can break something that even looks like it's just one skill down into smaller parts, and then teach your child those small parts so that it's not too hard for them, so that they're making progress, and so that you're getting somewhere rather than giving up on the whole thing as being too hard. Now, how would we do this? Let's think of an example. The one I've gone for here is making tea. That may not be a skill that you choose to focus on. It's not particularly relevant to many kids for how they interact with the world. May not be great for passing those criteria. I've chosen it more because we're adults, and adults might understand the process of making tea. So hopefully you'll, even if you're not a tea drinker, you've heard of tea and you kind of know what goes into making it. But let's think through the skill of making tea. Lots of us, one reason I've chosen this is because if you do drink tea, you kind of do it automatically and you don't really think about what goes into doing it. Here's a simple sort of illustration of what I think maybe goes into making tea. Number one there, you boil the kettle. Number two, you get a tea bag and put it in a cup. Number three, you pour in the hot water. Number four, you let it brew, and then you've got tea. Pretty simple, right? So this could be your child's skill, and you break it down into those steps. But what happens if you're getting frustrated? You're trying to teach your child something and you can't get through all these steps, or you're getting stuck. What do we do about that? Well, we try and break it down further. In this case, what if we just look at boiling the kettle? Maybe that's where we're getting stuck. We can actually break boiling the kettle down into more steps. Can anyone tell me some of the steps involved in boiling the kettle? Any ideas for that one? Type your ideas into the chat. It's kind of a tricky one. Kim, turn on the tap. Laura, fill it. Yep, that's good. Open it. Yep, you got to open it first, Rachel. Exactly. Kim and Laura have got a big mess because it's all hit the lid, maybe. Pay the water bill, Lauren. Yep, you need to have water if you're going to put it in the kettle. Penelope, yep, fill it with water. Great ideas, folks. Keep them coming if you want. Here's my version. Fill the kettle with water. Put it back on its base. Press the switch. Wait for it to boil. But like you guys have been commenting, even that first one, we could break that down further, couldn't we? You've got to pick up the kettle. You've got to take it to the sink. You've got to open the lid. You've got to turn on the tap. You've got to hold the kettle under the tap. This might all sound a bit silly, like, Tony, why are you going on about this? It's obvious how to boil a kettle. This is just an analogy for your child's behavior, in that that's a mistake we often make. We look at trying to teach our child how to say, how to share, or how to say thank you. And we're like, just say it. What's so hard about that? Just say it. Whereas in reality, there might be some component skills to that. Like, first of all, recognizing here's a situation where I'm supposed to say thank you. Second of all, remembering what the word is, thank you. Third, being able to form the sounds with your mouth. And, fourth, not saying something else like, and I hate you, or, maybe there's other skills involved there. So if you're applying this way of thinking to your child's skill, it can be powerful to try and work out if you're struggling, why that is. So the recommendation is break it down into small skills. What would be another classic example? Let's say the one of playing independently. You're trying to get your child to play independently. You're prompting them. You're offering them things to do. Might be that there's a component of that skill that they haven't quite got. It might be that they haven't worked out how to choose an activity, or they haven't worked out how to open the box of the toy that they want to play with, or they haven't worked out how to say what they want to play with, or they haven't worked out how to come up with their own design, or how to stack the blocks in the way that they want to. So there could be all sorts of component skills that you could identify and target, which you don't really care about those component skills. The only value to you is that it helps your child do that bigger skill that you're thinking might help you with the tantrums in the broader scheme of things. Right? So we've really gotten into something quite specific here that you might feel is not so related to tantrums, but I'm trying to show you how it does relate back to what we're trying to do with tantrums. So that's all the content we have to cover for tonight, folks. Now remember, we have our feedback surveys. Many of you have been very obliging in helping us out by providing us with some great feedback, which we really pay attention to. We do a new feedback survey every week if you have a chance to fill that out. Kim shared that in the chat, but you don't have to do it now. At the end of the session, when I end it, it will load automatically in your browser if you're on a computer. Or you can click the link. So that would be really appreciated if you can. At the end of the course, if you participated in the pre-course, there was a bigger survey before the course, that will come out again at the end of the course, which would be super if you can participate in that as well later on. That takes like 5 minutes to complete at the end of the course, because that'll give us an idea of, did we help you at all, or was this just a whole lot of talking and maybe you liked it, but it didn't actually make any difference to you. So that's what we covered today. That's a recap on the 5 practical tips which we started off with. We can go through those again during question time if you want, or if you've got any questions about those, I can bring them back up on the screen. I think you guys can do better than this by now. We've got some ideas that are going to get you further than just these 5 practical tips. So I hope you're setting your sights high and aiming to achieve more than just that. It's okay if you're not. And remember, if you're concerned or upset, you can let us know, but also you're going to want to seek some further support. If you call these hotlines, they can help give you some advice about what you might do. And next session, if you do have to go, please do join us again next week. Remember, you need to try and participate in as many sessions as you can, preferably live. They're going to be more effective than watching the recordings. Next session, we're going to be talking about getting better behavior in the long term, which is all about managing situations sort of proactively so that we can, as always, reduce the likelihood of tantrums. So recording and handouts will be available later this week. Fingers crossed. We had a delay with the previous ones. They only came out yesterday, I believe. That was due to some technical challenges, getting them out of the system, editing them, getting them out to you guys. Apologies for that. But the next one should be out kind of the end of this week. We're going to stick around for question time now. I notice we've got heaps of good ones coming in through the chat box. What I'm going to do is turn off my video momentarily. I'm going to stop talking just while I'm doing some reading, and then we're going to start talking about question time, helping you out with your ideas, questions, trying to fine-tune this for you and what you're trying to do in your family. All right, bear with me. Session's not over. I'm just going to stop talking for a minute. All right, I'm back. We'll go through some of these excellent questions that you guys are sending in. Keep typing yours though. We've still got 10 minutes or so, so you've got a good chance. And particularly think about how you're going at the moment. I'd love to hear if you're struggling with anything, or just if there's anything that wasn't quite clear to you about what you're doing so far. Because remember, in the first 4 sessions we covered some fundamental skills that you're going to need to keep using. So over the next 3 weeks, you need to keep doing everything that we covered in those first 4 sessions. If there's anything in there that you're not sure on, now's a great time to ask me, or next week. So first of all, from Kim, we had a question about what about a 2-year-old saying no to people for no reason? Depends how much of a problem that is for you. And your analysis of what the purpose of that behavior is. So I'd go right back to, say, session 1 and 2 and try and identify, right, what sort of response does this get from people, or when does it tend to happen most? All that kind of analysis around the context that we did early on. And also identify replacement behavior. So that could be really effective there, where you try and say, all right, here's something else that my child should be saying to people. And coach them and provide them with positive consequences when they do that replacement behavior. Rachel, you had a question around understanding boundaries. This sounds like a social skill question, where other kids don't really like it getting hugged or holding hands, right? And I wonder if this kind of leads to frustration and tantrum behavior for your child, or if it's more just you're concerned about the impact on how they socialize. I would say for that, it's going to be really important to just work on replacement behavior. So I wouldn't focus too much on the holding hands and hugging in particular. I would start talking about things like personal space and how great it is to have a little bit of room around you, and how we can kind of stand the right distance from people, and how we can maybe wave to people or smile at people or do something other than hugging and holding hands. And then, over time she can see how that works better for her, and you can provide positive consequences as well. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're getting at, Rachel, but let me know if that's kind of what you were thinking. Sharon, you have a point about patience in your 10-year-old playing with her 6-year-old sister, and basically flexibility, right? That your 10-year-old tends to want your 6-year-old sister to do things her way. That's a tricky one, in that flexibility is very hard to teach directly. It's quite a complicated psychological skill. Your best chance is to break this down to the typical kinds of situations that tend to bring this challenge up, and then having, if you need to, a different strategy for each of those situations, at least at the start. And so, you'll look at the purpose, identifying purpose, come up with a replacement behavior based on all that good work we did in the earlier sessions, and then work at ways of incentivizing it. And then if that goes well enough for your 10-year-old over time, she's going to get the message across all these different situations that it's all right, I don't have to be as in control, or things go better for me when I'm not being as demanding of my sister or trying to push her around so much. So that's my advice for that one, I think. Again, it's kind of hard to tell without knowing more about what's going on in your family. Try not to focus on the general, broad concept. Break it down into different situations. Melissa, you had a point about your 7-year-old getting cranky with your 3.5-year-old. Similar situation, lashing out when the younger one doesn't do what she wants him to do. Similar sort of response. It depends on the type of lashing out. I think a replacement behavior is going to be really important. But I'm also wondering about the broader context around frustration in your family. If your 7-year-old daughter is and I know this is me assuming way too much here, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm wondering if your 7-year-old daughter is kind of generally frustrated about the role of her younger brother in her life. That might be one where if you can think of skills or ways of them interacting that are more satisfying for your 7-year-old, it might be less likely to lead to this kind of frustration or lashing out type of behavior. So that's quite, and I realize that's a very general thing that I'm saying to you. It's kind of the best I can do. I would use some of the ideas we had tonight around trying to work out what it's like for your daughter overall. Like, is she getting really frustrated in general in your family? And ways you can get around that or help her out with that frustration without necessarily focusing on just that situation where the behavior is a problem. Kim, another question, ways to break down the skill of potty training. That's quite a tricky one. I have to confess I'm no expert on potty training. My guess, and this could be wrong, is the first part of that skill is kind of recognizing when they need to go to the toilet. So that usually, I think, starts around routine, and you're just kind of getting them to go every so often. And then when they do go successfully, they kind of build up that association and kind of learn to recognize the feeling in their body that relates to needing to go to the toilet. And then there'd be things like sitting on the potty. So often you do a lot of that in potty training, I think. Just getting them to sit there even if they don't need to go. And getting them to stay there long enough rather than getting up again. So if they need to stay there for a few minutes, just starting with that, giving them a toy or something to do while they're just sitting there, getting used to the idea of being there. So that's some ideas. Can't really come up with anything else off the top of my head. But some other people in chat might have ideas as well for breaking down potty training, particularly if you've been through that more recently than me. I mean, as a parent, not obviously I went through potty training as a child, I suspect. Okay, Nikki, you've got a question about the skill of listening and responding, because this seems to lead to frustration for your daughter. Well, that's quite a complicated one, I think. It depends a bit on your daughter's age and the context, and that sometimes kids will not listen or get frustrated because they're already tired or they're already fixated on something else. And I wonder if it's a problem, how much of a problem it is her getting frustrated. If we ask her what she is after, she doesn't seem to pay attention. So then you can do things, I don't know, people do things like, listening ears, and they kind of do a motion which kind of indicates that you need to stop talking and do something with your ears. So you can sometimes build up an association around that, where you kind of grab your earlobes and try and prompt your child to grab their earlobes as well. Just kind of like those behavioral things. It might be a hard ask though, if they're already frustrated and listening is not one of their strengths to begin with. You could use other ways of communicating, like more visual stuff. Maybe you guys develop a kind of system where you kind of say stop or something and hold up your hand when she's getting overwhelmed and not concentrating or not paying attention. Get her to calm down first and then try and get her to listen. But in general, if this is in like high risk situations where it leads to tantrums, or if it leads to more, behavior escalating, remember in this course I'm kind of advocating not relying too much on listening or what you do in the moment. It's more about the context and the consequences and making sure that that kind of behavior isn't inadvertently reinforced. Right, she's 2 and it's usually around dinner time. So you might be able to do some other things around the dinner time routine. I mean, I suspect you're probably already doing a good job, Nikki, around if you struggled with this for a while. We all know 2-year-olds can be really difficult at dinner time. So it's important that you don't set your sights too high. I know that's not very helpful for me to say, but that we have realistic expectations for listening and paying attention at dinner time. it might be that you have to let some of that go and you'll have more success on focusing on other skills like feeding herself or saying that she wants to try a particular type of food or getting her to help set the table so that she feels involved in dinner time. So that's a, sort of a special case where there's lots you can do around that routine if you think about all the different components and getting them involved. And you can probably do some research on Raising Children Network around dinner time routines that might be useful to you. But I would treat that as a special case, I think. All right, I think that's covered most people's questions. You guys have done an excellent job participating. We've had really good involvement from you guys tonight. Remember, we'll be back again next week. We've got another session where you'll have a chance to ask more questions. Please do keep doing stuff during the week. I think, personally, I feel like this course asks a lot of you guys. We're getting you to put a lot of ideas into practice in what I think is quite a short period of time. So while you're going through that process, think about, which bits are working well for you, which bits are hard, which bits you don't really want to do, so you're probably not going to do them. Just let us know. No one's going to yell at you for not doing it the way I want you to. Because I really want you guys to take this opportunity. After week 7, you're going to be out there on your own and you're not going to have a chance to ask me more questions, at least not for the time being. So it's good to kind of, maybe invest half an hour on Monday night or something, sit down and think through, if you're not already doing this during the week, right, these are the bits I'm working on at the moment. Maybe revisit the recap slides that we put in. How am I going with those different bits? Because I'd love to get questions or comments from you about, how you're going with different bits of it, any troubleshooting that we can do. But you've had really good questions tonight. So what I'll do is I'll end the session there. If you're willing to participate in our feedback survey, that should open automatically in your browser if you're on a computer of some sort. I appreciate your attention. I hope you have a great week. Good luck with managing those tantrums. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you same time next week. Have a good evening.